So, this is a short video of my life uh, from birth up to the age of 25. It is the first part, and I hope you enjoy it. I was born in Durham in a hospital called Dryburn Hospital. It's now called the North University of North Durham or something like that. No one ever calls it that. It's always Dryburn Hospital. Born in 1970.
It was party time. Time to let rip and let 1970 know it was welcome.
To my parents. We lived in a place called Low Fell, which is just below Newcastle, in about a mile or two south from Newcastle. We lived there, and we then moved from there to Chesterley Street, which is usually pronounced Chesley Street, in 1976. We moved there because my family, my mum's parents lived there. My mum's sister lived there, their family. And I think it was just one of those things where they decided to come back to Chesterley Street, which was only about 5 or 6 miles away from where we lived in the early 70s. The house that we moved into was a house that was a bungalow at the time. So everything was on one floor. It was because my mum in the late 50s was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So she had a lot of mobility issues, but she could still work. My dad obviously worked as well. And we lived there. I don't have many memories from the age of like 7 to around about 10 or 11, going to primary school, and then junior school, and then obviously then secondary school, which is like the high school equivalent in the UK. And so I remember just being, not very studious at school. Wasn't somebody who was in the top classes. I just didn't really apply myself. I was just one of those things where I thought, oh, just get on, have fun, but just get on and do things. Eventually, I was asked by one of my friends if they wanted to go to a Christian like club in lunchtime, and one of the reasons was, in fact, the primary reason is that if you went to a club at lunchtime, you could get in on the first lunches and then go to the club. So eventually, I went to this at the age of 12, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. I mean, I wasn't brought up in a religious household. I wasn't, none of my parents attended church regularly. Although my mum did have some sort of small sort of connection to her church, and that was it. And eventually, I became a Christian at the age of 13. And it was at this time I knew that I was gay. Around about the age of 12, 13, I knew. I think I probably thought about it for about 15 minutes at the most. I mean, I remember being called gay. Somebody in the playground said, oh, you're gay, puff or something like that. I can't remember. And I remember thinking to myself, well, yeah, I am, aren't I?
Hi, everybody. This is Scott.
And I know that I wasn't like the other lads. I wasn't talking about girls all the time.
I'm going to squeeze right in here if my thighs will let me.
I wasn't obsessed with, trying to get off with a girl or whatever it was. And that was it. There was never a particularly long, struggle where people will think about their own sexuality for years and years and years on end. It was one of those things where I just thought, yeah, I know I was. That was it.
Oh, for the love of penis.
And being gay was not as acceptable as it is now. So I didn't come out at that time. And one of the reasons for that, staying in the closet, was this.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all. It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure. The virus can be passed during sexual intercourse with an infected person. Anyone can get it, man or woman. So far, it's been confined to small groups, but it's spreading. So protect yourself. and read this leaflet when it arrives. If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you. So don't die of ignorance.
You can imagine, not many people came out. I didn't know anybody who was gay back then. For that very, very scary advert. And the notion that if you were to say to somebody I was gay, people then automatically believe that you had AIDS. And going through school, I didn't do very well. I didn't really apply myself. I wasn't really a studious person because it was just a fun time. I wasn't really interested in a lot of the subjects that were at school. I liked English. I wasn't very good at it. I liked maths. I was better than that. I did, like that sort of thing. And I liked things like general studies where you did like a sociology sort of thing.
And sociology.
An ology? It gets an ology and it says it's failed. You get an ology, you're a scientist.
So I became a Christian at the age of 13. I got my Bible, first Bible, and I started to go to a church youth group at the age of 14, right next to where I live now. And I met some really, really good people there. And it was one of the things that really had a huge influence on my life. I remember being 12 and 13 and loving music. It was one of the sort of things that I really, really enjoyed. I absolutely loved music. It was something to it that I didn't have many hobbies. I used to go out on my bike, riding that sort of thing. I used to play a lot of tennis when I was younger as well, believe it. But music for me was one of the most important things. And I really got into trying to play a guitar and trying to play piano as well. And eventually I got my first guitar. I think I was about 15 or 16. I can't remember. I think it was quite a cheap sort of Fender acoustic guitar. And I remember thinking at any opportunity that I could get to a piano, I would try and practice. And I remember some friends teaching me certain things and stuff like that. So, but basically I taught myself to play the piano as well, because I really enjoyed playing music and listening to music. So eventually I left school with very little qualifications. I tried to do resits, tried to get better grades, didn't work out. But I did manage to get an O level in biology.
An ology? It gets an ology and it says it's failed. You get an ology, you're a scientist.
In the resit in 1 year. I hadn't done biology before. I promised that the teacher that I was trying my best to get. I did, and I passed it, so I was pleased with that. Basically, coming up on my mind at that time was, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I remember doing a lot of volunteering at the time. My dad worked in a hospital for people with mental and physical handicaps, and I did a lot of volunteering at that place on the weekends when I was 15, 16. And I remember thinking, well, at the time, I wanted to go to theological college. I felt that God was calling me at that time to go to theological college. And I knew I couldn't because you had to be 18. So what was I going to do? I'd left school when I was 17, and I decided that I would do some volunteering again. And I would leave home, go on a scheme called Time for God, which was basically a time where you would volunteer. You would get like pocket money once a week. I think it was something like £15, I think, back then in 87. And I left and went to a place called Evenley Hall. And ironically, at the interview for this scheme that I went to volunteer, I said, look, don't put me in a place with people with physical and mental handicaps because I didn't volunteer in there. So where did they put me? In a place of volunteer. Anyway, so I left Chesterley Street. I remember getting the coach in 1987 down from Sunderland coach station, which was very different than it is now, down to Northampton, where the person who was running the place would pick me up. Unfortunately, the coach broke down. and it was 2 hours late, and there was no mobile phones that people have now these days, so there was no way of contacting him. So he stood at the station in Northampton for 2 hours, and his face was like thunder. When no like welcome, or the fact that he was getting sort of free labor from me, because he didn't have to pay anything to work different shifts in this home. And so that was in a place called Brackley in Oxfordshire. And so moving down from Chester Street to Brackley, my accent, I used to have a very, very, very northeast accent back then. I was very, that sort of thing. But that's why my accent's a little bit more smoother. So I left home age of 17, went there, and I wasn't really happy there because it was me up the top of a room at this big place, and there wasn't any young people around. There wasn't the support like I had of people at the youth group that I had back here in Chester Street. And so I decided I would leave and I would find another place to do some volunteering. And eventually the scheme found a place called East Barnet Baptist Church. And it was great. I loved it. This was in a part of London. I'd never really spent a lot of time. I think I'd been there for like a couple of weeks, again doing volunteering in the summer of '87, and but that was out in Surrey somewhere, and so I had some sort of idea what London was at, but I didn't really know that much, and that was great. I really enjoyed it. Opened my eyes a lot, and there's a lot of stories I could tell, but obviously I won't at the moment about that. And I really loved that place. The people were great, and it had a youth group and with lots of the young people. I was part of that, and I was working in the church, working in for like they were like day center things that were set up for elderly people. I helped with that, and it was good. I really, really enjoyed it. And again, I was practicing on my day off to play the piano as well as one of the things I really, really enjoyed doing. So eventually, I was applying for theological colleges. And I remember applying to various different things. And eventually, one came called Overston College. I didn't know that much about theological colleges, but eventually they accepted me. And, I hadn't had very good qualifications. I wasn't particularly academic, but they saw a sort of interest in me and sort of spark they thought they would take that on, and I was ever grateful for that. I went to that, and I started a little bit later than everybody else because in September in 1988 I caught measles, and so I had to. I think it was something like 2 weeks after the actual start date, and I turned up, and I realised it was a black Pentecostal theological college, a Bible college, and it was a culture shock because obviously coming from the northeast of England back in the 80s down to Northampton, things were different. The ethnicity was different. Um, but I certainly wasn't a racist person. I still aren't. I'm not now, but I enjoyed it. I loved it. And I was there. It was a residential college, so I obviously living in the college itself, and was there for 3 years. I really, really enjoyed the place. I met some wonderful people. It's one of the things that I always think back now that if I was ever to do something again, I would always love to do that again because yes, it was tough, and it took me a long time to get in the swing of studying, of essays, and all the sort of things that went on, and exams as well. And it was a sort of tough place to be. So I graduated from there in 1991 with a diploma in theology. And I wanted to think about the next part of my life. What was I going to do? And eventually it came round that I wanted to go into teaching. I thought I didn't want to go into the church full time. I knew the barrier of me being gay and not being open with it at the time would be something difficult. And I know there's a lot of people who have gone into the church and gone into these sort of religious roles and they're gay, and that's fine. But for me, it didn't mix, and it wasn't something that I was prepared to give up, as in being gay or denying it. That's something I would never do. I remember at the time when I had been at Overston that my mum had been unwell again with her multiple sclerosis. She had been in and out of hospital quite a few times. It was a worrying time. So I made the decision that I would come back to Chester Street. I would stay with my parents again, and I would do my degree uh, at home. And so I applied to Sunderland University. I got in there. I was going to do a degree in religion and sociology. They asked me to do philosophy at the time because the course was full. And so I reluctantly said, okay, I'll do that. And I pursued for the first year religion with philosophy. And during this time, mum again was being unwell, and it was difficult to try and look after her and make sure my dad was okay because he started to suffer with very bad asthma. And I have told the story about what happened to him when he passed away in 1994. This was at the end of my studies at Sunderland. And so it was a big shock. It was one of these things where, should I go to teacher training? Should I go to the college? And my mum encouraged me to say, yes, you should go there. One of the things I thought of doing was applying quite jokingly to Cambridge or Oxford. I know that it was a bit silly at the time. I remember thinking, well, I've done this. I've come to do my diploma in theology. I've come to do my degree in religion and sociology. Let's apply to Cambridge. Let's apply to Oxford. And you could either only apply for one or the other. But one the form is that I applied to Cambridge and I applied to a college called Westminster College in Oxford. And it was because it was affiliated to the university, but it wasn't actually the university. The PGC, the course, Postgrad Certificate in Education, was validated by the University of Oxford. And I did a joke. I thought, oh, yeah. So the way you go with the process, it's something like 10 or 11 months before the course starts. You got an interview, and I applied and I got rejected from Cambridge or whatever, and that's fine. The next thing, it goes to the next sort of college you apply to, was Westminster College. I thought, okay. And they invited me for an interview, and I was in shock. I thought, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. And my parents were so very pleased because obviously this had been just before my dad had passed, and said, come on, you got to go. Went down and did the interview, and I thought, okay, I was fairly okay. I didn't think, too much of it. A few days later, the letter came through. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get rejected again. And it came, and they offered me a place to start my postgrad certificate in September 1994. And I couldn't believe what I'd done. I was like, what have I done? It's like, this is completely out of my depth. At school, I hadn't applied myself. Yes, I got my degree and my diploma, but I just thought, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. Dad had passed in the July, and myself and my mum made the decision that I would go. In hindsight, it probably wasn't a good idea, but that's for another day. So the day came to go to Westminster College, and I spent a fantastic year there. It was the craziest year I remember for academic things, as in school prep, school work, preparation for the lessons. We had to do essays. There was no exams, but there was so much to do. I was working 6 days a week. I deliberately would give myself Saturday off because I knew that it was just so mad. And at the time, I was travelling from Oxford up to Banbury. Banbury Comprehensive is where I did my teacher training. And I was asked by the college to take three other students up there. And I was paid expenses because what happened was my mum had to stop driving in 87 when she retired due to ill health. And I inherited the family car, which was a car that was only a year old. So every time one of the students that I had with me would say, well, how come you've got a car like this? I had to explain. They went, oh my God. I said, it's fine. This is what's happened. So Banbury Comprehensive was my place to do my teacher training for a year. It was good. I enjoyed it. I met, again, some fantastic people. I'm going to give it a shout out to Jeremy, the only person that I've mentioned in this vlog. It was so funny. I've never laughed so much in my entire life. It was just a great time. Tough, but great. I loved it. We didn't have a graduation. It was one of these things where there wasn't any score. You either failed or you passed. You passed or you failed. And I remember going back down to the college at the end of the academic year, in the middle of June, I think it was, and seeing on the board that your name was either pass or it was fail. And I remember that day seeing my name on there, and I couldn't believe that I'd actually passed. It just didn't feel real. It felt so surreal that I'd come from doing very little at school, leaving with very little qualifications, to now spending 7 years going back to college, working really hard, and then becoming a teacher.